Yo, what's up everybody? This story about what Itachi is from the Gojo clan and Satoru Gojo brother. Let's start.
He woke up. In any other scenario, or if he were any other person, there would be nothing to it. Most people closed their eyes and opened them back up 5 to 6 hours later, like puppets. Controlled by unseen threads. He was not like most people. Most people didn't die bleeding out with blurred eyes and a sickly frame, only to wake up at an indescribable later time. Pale gray eyes stared at the wooden beams above his head for what felt like ages, but his keen mind broke it down to only 1 hour, 24 minutes, and 56 seconds. Though his instincts screamed at him to roll off what his back told him was a futon and explore his new surroundings, all he wanted to do was just nothing. He was exhausted, beyond tired, and he hoped it had ended, but hope was a lie. He knew that more than most. Yet, here he was again, staring at a ceiling, knowing this. Real as anything. With his experience with genjutsu, it would take Kami himself to deceive his senses. If left to himself, he would have languished there for however long, but as the sun slowly crept into his room, chasing away the comforting darkness and shadows, he heard soft knock on what he assumed was a door. A second later, the door slid aside, and a soft and demure voice called out, "Jiki-san." He stayed still, wishing the voice away. Why? Called out again, softly, this time with more urgency. The family head would be displeased if he knew you're still in bed. This time, the voice had a touch of pain. Physical pain. He raised himself up on one soft arm, with little to no musculature, and looked at the black-haired woman standing. Entrance to his room. With a slow blink and another glance, he reassessed her from a woman to a teen, judging by her still soft cheeks, lack of any wrinkles, and the bright of her eyes. She was garbed in a black one-piece gown with a white cloth upon it. Her head remained bowed as he quietly observed her. With slow and unfamiliar movements, he got to his feet. The transition from a 5'8" lethal physique bred for war to a toddling mass of soft flesh and poor motor control would have taken any other person months. But he had it down by the 10th second after getting up and on his 7th step toe. The teen. He went from jerky, uncoordinated movements to a refined, smooth pace, and his bare feet barely made a sound on the wooden floor. He stopped directly in front. Her bowed head and whispered, "I'm up." She brought her head up and gave him a soft, familiar smile that reminded him of his mother, a smile that radiated immense love and kindness, a smile he smothered in to rest for the sake of peace. Something must have shown in his expression, as the teen flinched back. Then followed an unfamiliar routine. He was led out of the house into a bathroom. Stepping into the bathtub filled with water, he stared at a familiar face with unfamiliar features. The paradoxes of the statement forced him to narrow his eyes, showing his trademark lines below his gray eyes. Bone-white hair fell down his head in waves and tickled his ears while masking his implacable visage of pure apathy. The maid rolled up her sleeves before taking up a pail water and dumping it above his head. He felt sensations he'd never imagined he'd ever feel again. The rest of the bath was a blur, culminating with the maid toweling him and dressing him in a white hakama and a matching black and white checkered kimono, while his F were clad in finely textured wooden geta. He ignored the unfamiliar sensation of being dressed and stoically listened to the maid's incessant prattling. He learned that he w. member of the Gojo clan, and today was his 4th birthday, which meant he would be meeting the clan head. His elder cousin had also left earlier for Jujutsu High for his year. The walk to the clan head was more sedate and quiet, with the maid sending him nervous glances. He ignored them and followed her, a step behind and to the side. They stepped out of the house and walked on well-paved cobblestones that led from his house, which he realized was on the outskirts of the clan compound, to the inner compound. He ignored the stares from his black-haired clan members and the occasional white-haired member as they reached the house in the center, a traditional house that felt like a fortress than a home. The closer they got, the more wooden his maid's posture, walking steps, and features became. They stood in front of the door for seconds before she mustered the courage to finally knock. She barely touched the doors before they opened slowly. She stopped there, agave him a look that was equal parts fear, begging, and desperation. He stared into her eyes, gray into black, and tried to decipher what she was screaming at him with. His efforts proved futile, so he did the only thing he hoped would ease her. He slipped his little pale hand into her rougher palms before giving it a slight squeeze. Her grip was instinctual. He gave her a soft nod before heading in. The door closed shut behind him, leaving him trapped in a dark house. His eyes slowly adapted to the darkness as he patiently waited. The dark was not an enemy. It was comforting as a mother's touch. He was born in it, molded by it. Half his life was spent in it. He had no fear of it. He took soft steps as his eyes adjusted to the darkness. His feet while leaving his arms folded in the kimono. It took him a minute to reach the end of the hallway, where the door automatically opened and led him into a cavernous room with tatami mats spread out at the end. Eyes fall into a half-lidded gaze instead of blinking, as the harshness of the room's sudden light requested of him. The room was ringed by bronze statues, each depicting a man sitting in seiza with extreme features ranging from maniacal smiles to wrathful expressions. All held prayer and looked at the person in the middle. Even from his distance, he felt something malicious from the man seated in the middle. Not necessarily chakra, but an aura that permeated the surroundings and choked way that almost made him stagger. His wide eyes and hitched breath were his only show of emotion at the suffocating aura. The elderly man opened his eyes and stared at him before nodding at a mat directly placed in front of him. He replied with his own nod before walking to it and sitting with legs tucked and his hands placed palm flat on his lap. The elder closed his eyes once more, giving him the opportunity to study his features. Skin so pale, he must have never felt the sun in decades, yet bearing musculature that of a fighter, with a black kimono that looked as though they were tailored for him as he sat, bearing nary a wrinkle. His glance shifted to the statues surrounding them, cataloging their features. He had barely started on the third before the man's eyes opened once more, and he gave a look that drew his complete attention. Gojo Jiki. His voice came out raspy and rough. Do you want to be a sorcerer? The conversation that followed that question shaped the next 2 years of his life. He stepped out of the house with a shallow idea of curses, cursed techniques, 3 great clans, his family, and his place in it. It also gave him an idea of why his maid was scared of him walking in. His mother died while giving birth to him, and his father, a mediocre sorcerer by the clan head's standard and rather spiteful man, named him Jik. The spot for his birth brought about death. His next 4 years before his awakening were spent being taken care of by his maid, Aiko. The black-haired teen had practically raised him from birth like her own child and for the choices that would be laid before him as a direct descendant of Mikazane Sugawara and a member of the Gojo clan. The clan head's clear lack of interest in him after his decision dropped his standings in the clan by a fair amount. But he had no interest in being part of such a life again. World was as close to having peace as he ever imagined compared to his last. He saw no reason to stand at the forefront anymore. His elder cousin, bearing the weight of clans once in a century dojutsu and the burdens that came with it, brought memories of his own time as clan heir. Memories he would rather have left forgotten in that world. He spent the next 2 years in his clan's library and learned so much about this new world. He had assumed the elemental nations and this earth were similar, but at the world map, the wars fought, the histories told, and the alliances formed, he was certain now that he was nowhere near the elemental nations. The easy access to technology that he had, even in his apparent isolationist clan, was more than even the top heads in the hidden villages ever received. He spent his days on mundane things, trying to live a life he never had the opportunity to live. From paintings in the morning with Aiko, to working on his writing and callig. Alone in the library among clan mates that had little to no love for him. Yet, he didn't care for it. Any other child would have craved the attention of family, perhaps that was the old bastard's plan when he set all this into motion. But not Itachi. He deserved the love of a new family. Not after he slaughtered his last for the sake of peace. Not after what he had done in the Anbu in the guise of orders from commanders. No, Itachi saw no reason to get close to this new family, and the distance most of them kept suited him and made it all the better. The only light in his dark world of apathy, angst, and horrible memories was Aiko. Where most clan members had shut him out and moved on with their lives, Aiko stuck even closer to him. His first painting was of her smile as she helped bathe him. And things Itachi had tried his hand at, it was as perfect as it could be. The dark of her hair was wrapped in a bun under a white cloth, the strands that escaped at the sides and moved with the soft early morning breeze. Her hands were covered foam as she washed his white locks while whispering sweet nothings to him. The radiant glow of a woman that was happy and loved what she did, bright smiles she only to him when they were together. After his first work, she took it and with tears in her eyes, hugged him so tight she would have broken his spine if she kept it up any longer. The next day, he woke up with an canvas with ultra smooth, fine, and coarse brushes lining the aisles, and a beautiful number of colors on the side, courtesy of the clan head himself. He was confused, and for the first time in a long time, he was forced to reassess the old man's opinion of him. Didn't he despise him for wanting to live a mundane life? His second painting, which was of the bronze figures he saw in the mansion, to disappear the following morning from his aisle, only to reappear once more on the door. That forbidding house for him to realize his mistake. He had automatically assumed the clan head was much like the Uchiha clan elders, who would try to shape and mold the younger ones into what they wanted. Who cared about bloodlines, cursed ability, status, and martial prowess than what other skills a child would have to offer. He knew most clans were like that considering his forays into clan library, but it just occurred to him that he never even gave his clan leader a chance. The slip-up was a show of his humanity. Inasmuch as the Uchiha clan elders and Konoha tried to make him perfect, he wasn't. He was as human as everyone else. The th brought a smile to his face. A smile that was covered in a bright flash a second later by what appeared to be his maid with what he learned was a camera. She gave him an brighter smile than he believed he could ever possess before skipping out of his workshop. Days later, he started hearing the whispers once more. The accursed words that brought so much suffering to his past life. Genius. Prodigy. The side glances that he got for clan members changed from apathy to interest. How many 5-year-old children could recreate the beautiful images and finely detailed artworks he produced so easily? At end of the day, he was able to get past it as despite the similarities in the words, the context differed. Here nobody was praising his genius for finding the perfect angle to slit a man's jugular and carotid in a single stroke. He was not called a prodigy here for learning how to and draw explosive tags on the spot. No. He was praised for the mundane art of painting. His art was usually visceral. Images burnt into his brain. A curse and blessing of Sharingan, a past life filled with enough horror to break lesser men. He was given a small building in the compound and to the side of his building to display his art, from paintings of the bloodstained beautiful grasses of Kusagaker, to the withering heavy snow and eternal winters of Yukigaker. He painted island villages from the elemental nations, where the sun, for some reason, rose once in 2 years. 2. Liminal and fluid nature of the various summoning realms. The unending skies and immutable mountains of the home of the hawks. To the everlasting darkness of the home of the crows and the albino red eyes matriarch that perk. A dead tree. If he was going to bring back anything from his cursed origins, it was going to be the beauty of the places he saw during his years of wandering with the Akat. His years of mundanity and bliss ended with a simple question that led to a future he could not have calculated or considered. A fickle chance, fate, horrid luck. At the age of 6, after a long day of working on his calligraphy, he looked up at his maid, Aiko-chan, and made a request that would change the course of his life. Born of tea memories of jumping from cafe to cafe with Sasuke as children during festivals. I want to go to a cafe, he whispered in his soft voice. Aiko-san looked at him for a second, before giving a soft smile and acquiescing. I'll see what can be done, young master. A week later, he woke up, followed his regular routine, and when it was time to be dressed, instead of his regular yukatas, hakama, and haori, he was dressed in a baggy long-sleeved shirt and white shorts that stopped before his knees, while his hair was tied into a bun at the back with only a few stubborn strands escaping it. His feet were black slides as he stared at his maid with uncertainty. She noted his surprise with a smile and announced to him, "The clan head has agreed to your request." He gave a soft nod as he followed her from their house to the main gates of their compound. A compound he had spent the last 2 years in. They were met by a man in a suit and a soft frown as he gestured at them into a matching black car. Seated inside as the car drove past the isolated clan compound and into the city, he realized the ray. For his change of clothes. Not a single person was dressed formally like the rest of the clan, and dressing like that would have drawn attention in a way that some part of him cringed. As they stepped and walked into a cafe, his head was on a swivel. Looking at everything and anything. It was one thing to see the pictures, and it was another thing to live it. Tokyo was 5 times more populated than any hidden village he knew about. And this was just a single city in a country that housed tens of them. His sightseeing was cut short as he started to notice them. Most of them were little malformed-looking creatures stuck on some specific humans. He saw a bigger one that stayed on a building. Twice as big as a horse, skin and uncan. Blue. 4 arms that sank into the stone like a hot knife through butter, and a multitude of eyes that lined its back and seemed focused on him. It watched them walk into the cafe, without moving from the spot. Aiko-san didn't seem to notice the creature, blissfully unaware as she pointed at everything that was on display. From boy bands on billboards to clothes and more. The strange and quiet man dressed in black gave it a side glance before leading them into the cafe. It was at their 5th location that it all changed. They stayed in a queue for minutes waiting to be served, a type of strange variation of dango that Aiko-chan promised was he. Their driver and escort had his head on a swivel with a heavy frown on his face since their 4th stop and excused himself after a short conversation with Aiko. It was this overload of this new experience that had him lower his guard and let something slip past. It started off as a spike of what he knew to be cursed energy from Chloe. Before a blue blurred figure was a step away from him. Then someone clothed in black with wide and terrified eyes stepped in front of him and pushed him to the side before disappearing in a blur. It took him 2 seconds to realize what happened. For his immense intellect to parse through the details of what felt like a split second. For the first time in this new life, he felt something. Something that broke his facade of apathy, as he noted the thick texture of freshly spilled blood that soaked his white and splashed on his right cheek. He stared at the broken and unmoving form that lay crumpled and bleeding at the side of a building. Itachi had been angry in his past life. Angry at the situation that forced him to slaughter his clan. Angry that he was forced to work with some of the most horrible people knew, all to help his village. Angry at the path he forced his little Ododo on. But he had never known hate. Yet the moment he felt it, he knew it for what it was. There was something about the purity of it. Where mind, body, and soul focused on one emotion. Aligned and in sync. Where you knew at that point in time, nothing could you from ending something. Even Kami would come down begging on folded knees, and you would still accomplish what you wanted to do. The world could crumble and be damned. All 30 million so. The city could be snuffed out as a result, and you would feel nothing other than the desire to end this creature. He knew hate for the first time in 2 lifetimes. It was almost like a dam had broken in him. He felt that hate flow through him. It called out like an old friend. Following long forgotten pathways before leading up to his The clarity of vision that came with the feeling burnt the image of the crumpled form in black and white into his spinning pupil as it split and multiplied from 1 to 3, folding on itself into another shape, in a rapid procession that most would have missed. He looked at the curse staring at him with its multiple eyes, an arm stretched out to grab him, and its skin splitting vertically in the middle of its face to reveal a carnivore maw. Heedless of the shouting and the movements of the masses by this intrusion into their worldview. This break in the pattern of their scripted lives. He said a single word to his throat raw. A word, a sentence, a promise, an order, a command that he expected the world to roll over to accomplish. With blood trailing down his left eye, he said, "Die." The jutsu was familiar. His ocular abilities erased the need for any hand signs, and it sprang into existence like an unwanted child finally shown love for the first time. Amaterasu was a beautiful jutsu. Effective at both attack and defense, at his peak, if he so desired, he could have rendered almost anything to ash in seconds. Yet he was no peak, not even anywhere close. It was that in the fact that whatever rank the cursed creature was, it was smart. Or had enough instincts to mimic it. It went from an arm outstretched, to jumping back. Moment the black flames began to blossom. He had aimed for the head, yet its reflective flinch back at the activation of a cursed technique saved its life. It went from a Sue to an obvious drawn-out fight. The heavenly illumination blossomed on its right hand. Black flames spread along its blue skin like liquid fire. His sheer hatred for the creature fueled its unending fire. Out an unholy screech while sending out its other 3 arms in a bid to crush him. He felt the noticeable loss in his cursed energy, enough to make him stagger back at the cost of the technique and shut his left eye immediately. Even in his former life, a technique he used lightly, and never at the beginning of a fight. It was a hammer of kami, meant to destroy any hope of victory. The predictive nature of the Sharingan saved him. Where he had barely noticed the curse move as a blur, this time he saw the grotesque fist move for his head. He tilted back and allowed his body to follow, almost falling flat backward before unused core muscles stopped him halfway and whipped him back up after the curse had withdrawn. Fist. He twisted to the side to dodge one massive fist the size of his torso, cursed energy moving through his body and reinforcing both muscles, bones, and nerves. With his familiarity with chakra reinforcement, he took to it like a fish in water. He took a step to the side to dodge an overhead blow that cratered the ground and sent shrapnel at him and dust into the surrounding. A simple cursed energy-enhanced leap back took him out of the cover of the dust. He had barely gotten to his feet before a tail swipe flew out from the dust cloud. The cur, using one of the best techniques at hand in fighting an inexperienced Sharingan user by sheer dumb luck. The dust covered the movement of the tail long enough for him to unable to react fast enough to dodge. For all his proficiencies with chakra reinforcement, this was a body using the technique for the first time, young, malleable, and soft. It could not bear the strain of heavy reinforcement, especially with his use of Amaterasu. 6 seconds into the fight and he could already feel the ache in his muscles, the creak in his bones, and the strain on his brain, forcing a mental acuity he could not keep up with. The blow hit him like a ton of bricks, slamming into his midriff and folding him along the width of the tail. He could hear his ribs creak at the blow, idly noticing one snap, was not going to be the end. He held onto the tail and followed the momentum of the attack before releasing it midair. High above the sky, he stared at it for a second. The dust cloud was dissipating. The creature had lost a hand and was in the process of losing another while the flames climbed up to its neck. It kept thrashing and rolling on the floor in a futile attempt at putting out the flames. But the black flames stuck close to it, its ever-hungry flames consuming. Growing. Slower than if he had consciously nurtured it, yet faster than any natural flame had a right to. His blood-soaked hair whipped around him, pulled out of its carefully crafted bun due to the short yet intense high-speed combat. He fell back towards the creature, ready. It all. His left eye was open once more, another Amaterasu on its way before an oversized axe slammed into the creature fast and hard enough to send out a shockwave and it flying into a car with guts and visceral spilling out. He was caught mid-air by a calloused hand that folded his small body into a ball as he felt the impact of the person slamming into the pavement at bone-rattling speed, reinforcement. He looked up at his savior and noted the young face stuck in an empty scowl of the driver. The suited man kept his focus on the curse, watching it crawl out of the wreckage of the car. Its unholy screech unabated as the black fire consumed more of it. The stench-burning meat was familiar to a man that spent half his life in war. The driver seemed surprised at the sight before acknowledging that it won't be moving to him. When his eyes met Itachi's, he almost dropped him at the sight of his eyes. Itachi shrugged a bit, and he was let down to stagger for a second, while the driver kept a hand on his shoulder to stabilize him. He sensed the second person and turned his head to look behind him. Mao, you Gojo sure are breeding terrifying monsters this generation. Takumi-san bill is definitely going up. the light blue-haired woman said with a soft smile and acquainted eyes as she walked up to them, axe on her shoulder. The edges of her long black skirt were splattered with blood. The driver's grip on his shoulders intensified. What terrifying eyes on such a beautifully crafted face. How would you like to model and make us some money, eh? He kept up his stare as the woman dropped to a stare at him with a big smile on her face, ignoring the driver beside him. A gasp for breath broke his focus on her as his Sharingan flicked to the crumpled form of Aoki. He made to stagger towards her in shock before a blur went past him to the and checked up on her. He had thought her dead. The sheer relief that single gasp of breath brought him could not be put into words. A soft smile had begun to break out. He heard the damning words. She's not likely to survive such wounds. The blue-haired woman pronounced after looking at Aiko. She turned to the driver. We are barely 20 minutes from the Gojo. Correct. The driver agreed with a nod, an even deeper frown on his face as he had an idea of where she was going with her questions. I'm only barely good enough to stem her wounds with my reverse cursed technique. We take her there, and Takumi-san should be able to. The clan leader won't be bothered to break his isolation, just to tend to an ordinary maid, not even off the bloodline. The blue-haired woman made to say something before he interrupted. He would not lose her, anybody but her. He won't lose that one person he had grown to finally care f. Once more. He will, he stated with certainty. His soft voice broke into the conversation. They both stared at him, so he continued. Sharingan blazing in an uncontrolled spin and his V. Cracked this time. He could not say what it was that caused it, anger, sadness, joy, fear. He was uncertain. He had gone through more emotions today alone than he had past 2 years. I will make him. He said it with the certainty of a man who knew the sun would rise every day. The blue-haired woman gave him a smile that, for some reason, he could tell was more genuine. The sound of sirens in the background broke the moment as the driver made a decision, sweeping him off his feet and moving swiftly to their car, which looked remarkably untouched despite the destruction that surrounded them. He barely glanced at the ashes that were all that remained of the curse before he was deposited in the back seat. The blue-haired woman followed him in. The drive back to the compound was a blur. The driver rode like a man possessed, swapping lanes and breaking speed limits that he knew for certain would have consequences. Yet he couldn't bring himself to care, not when Aiko's head rested on his lap and grew colder with every passing second. Their arrival at the clan gates was announced with a kick that blew off the car door. The blue-haired woman took Aiko out and marched up the stairs into the compound, high. The driver following behind. The driver made to carry him once more, but he refused, instead staggering beside him. Formally dressed clan members walked by and stared with varying degrees of surprise and sadness. It must not be a new scene. People walking into the clan compound who, broken from the monsters they went to hunt and rid the world of. A couple stepped in to help as they headed towards the manor in the middle of the clan, only to find a white-haired teenager standing at the door. Startling bright blue eyes stared at him, and out of reflex, he sent the minuscule cursed energy he had left into his own eyes. The flinch he got as a response was unexpected, and the bright smile that followed after was even more so. The teen made to speak before the door suddenly swung open behind him. He shut his mouth with a reluctant frown and an exaggerated pout, before stepping aside. He knew who he was even without a word spoken between them. Gojo Satoru. Clan heir. Sole inheritor of the clan dojutsu, an all-round prodigy. He walked past him and stepped into the building as fast as his broken body would let him. This time there was none of the ceremony and fascination that surrounded his visit. The moment he stumbled into the room, he immediately collapsed on the futon spread out opposite the old man. Blazing, swirling Sharingan set in an exhausted face clashed with neutral eyes set in a face that might as well be formed from granite. Heal her, he grasped out. His tone was commanding, certain, sure, pleading. You're hurt for someone that went to peer at the outside world, the monotone voice replied while his eyes stayed stuck on his red spinning ones. I'm not the one bleeding out and dying right this moment, old man, he let out in a grunt so against his nature, so unfamiliar to him, he nearly recoiled back. The old man said nothing and stared at him. He was about to crack before he finally spoke. So are you, he continued after an uncomfortable silence, yet you somehow managed to use your cursed energy to brace yourself in an act of curse energy manipulation I would never have expected from a child of 6, and I don't need the 6 eyes. That. This time a raised eyebrow broke the uncaring facade. I can't lose her, he whispered out. That is no reason why should I bother with a mundane instead of focusing on you. The serenity in his words and his lack of hurriedness almost brought him to anger once more, but this time he held his emotions in check. Despite what he looked like, not a child. He was not prone to emotional outbursts even in his past life as a child, so something else must be fraying his nerves, causing him to lash out. Cutting the flow of cursed energy to his eyes and reducing his usage to nearly nothing, he stared at the clan head in silence. The words could not form. What reason could give a sorcerer at the pinnacle of the world to bother with a mundane woman that he cared nothing for? The old man knew nothing of her radiant smiles or her boisterous personality. He knew not of the way she made sure to check up on him twice a night to make sure he was. How she always sneaked in sweets for him during his lunches after she discovered his sweet tooth. No. At as 1 Ret 17. An appeal to emotions won't work here. The clan head was not necessarily wicked or cruel. He was just unfeeling toward the mundane. How many dead and dying Peohe seen? Why should he care about one more? What was one more death of a mundane maid to the hundreds of people that died every day? He knew the kind of experience that led to that thought process. He was intimately familiar with it. Yet he could not accept it here. Not when he finally found a reason to be happy. His nails dug deep grooves in his thighs as he looked at the clan head. His resolve solidified. He knew what it would come down to despite his efforts to convince himself otherwise. He was ready to sell his life once more. Ready to put everything on the line on the altar of sacrifice just for the opportunity of seeing a loved one spared a cherub. The old man saw the resolve in his steel-gray eyes and gave a sharp smile. He was asked a question that they both knew had only a single answer. Do you want to be a sorcerer? The kid is a monster in the making. He observed with a big grin, while he spectated his little cousin fight from 500 feet up. A borderline relentless machine in combat. A kidney shot landed on the instructor like a cannon. A kick to the side of the knee had black-haired man stumble out of his guard. He watched as he pirouetted on his feet and slammed a small fist into his instructor hard enough and with enough reinforcement to blow the man backward. The middle-aged man clad in a traditional style kimono flipped and landed on his feet, only to look up and see a kick whipping towards his face. He raised a guard fast Eno. Stop it, only for the little monster to pivot with the aid of the arm he used to block, to unleash another kick midair that sneaked past the instructor's guard and went for H. Head. The instructor tucked his head and raised a shoulder up in time to suffer a dislocation instead of a broken head. Using the grip on his leg, the instructor spun on his feet before slamming the kid on the floor. Hard enough to crack the solid slab of stone they fought on. The follow-up foot slam was dodged as the kid instinctively rolled the right. It was little things like that tripped him up. That made the clan head hide in the shadows of the building to spectate the fight of a 7-year-old child. That forced the monsters of the Gojo clan to monitor the fight, that made the other big clans send spies just for the sake of the child. The mutated 6 eyes that the clan had grown obsessed with over the past year. While its perception was not on the scale of the 6 eyes, it had proven to be more versatile. Case in point the predictive ability he seemed to display at odd moments. Jiki flipped to his feet and dodged a blow that was aimed at his head before it was even made, spinning to the back of the instructor in one fluid movement. He slammed H. Elbow just below the rib cage before slamming his foot into the back of the instructor using the force of the attack to flip further back. Another thing about the kid was the sheer speed he displayed and what Satoru had taken to call killer's instinct. At this age, other clan kids were still being taught how to actually hit an opponent. Where other people hesitated or flinched unconsciously, the kid never did. He skipped part of hand-to-hand training and moved straight to combat. He took hits stoically and made sure to reply them with a vengeance. The 3 black tomo in his red eyes spun slowly as he sank into a crouch, his body shaking from the effort it took to sustain such reinforcement and the toll of the fight. In the eyes of the 15 visible clan members watching the fight, the kid must have seemed as tranquil as the seas themselves. But the 6 eyes laid bare the truth. The K could not continue any further, yet the clan leader didn't call it to a halt. Despite his hands gripping each other behind his back tightly enough to crush granite. His face wore a mask of aloofness. He had still not figured out the clan leader's love for the kid. Most people couldn't tell. He hid it well enough with the way he seemed to ignore the kid before he woke his E. The way he pushed him into such grueling training even as a child must have seemed callous to most. But Satoru knew better. Satoru saw better. A scared maid stood to the side. He knew her. At least was familiar enough with her over the past 6 months to say so. Her trembling was more obvious, the fear and war. Her eyes. In her half-aborted movements, she made whenever he was hit. Yet she was even more powerless. To change anything. To do anything. The only reason she was even allowed this deep into the clan compound was because of Gigi. She was powerless. He stood above them all and contemplated the concept of power. On one side stood a man with enough power to end it, yet could not for duty shacked him. On another Sid, a woman with no power to do anything, change anything. What was life without the power to live it how you want? And what was the use of power if it couldn't be applied however one wanted? Satoru wanted to be free. It was on the reasons he aimed to be the strongest. Yet what use was the title of strongest, if he couldn't even do what he wanted? It was at this moment he came to a conclusion that would make him a menace to the higher-ups in the Jujutsu Society for years to come. If he was to be the strongest, the going to take advantage of that title. If the old man wasn't going to do anything, well, with the clasp of his hand, he flexes his cursed energy in a variation of his cursed technique, blue, to eliminate the distance between him and the kid. He appears beside T. Without a sound, yet the brat lashes out with a sloppy kick at his side. Nothing like his precise attacks from minutes ago. His foot stops an inch away from his spleen due to application of limitless and he grabs the kid by the scruff of his shirt holding him up. This has gone on for long enough. With a wide grin on his face, he teleports once more, appearing beside the maid before grabbing her by her waist. I'm taking my cousin on a vacation, see you guys later. Laughs at the shocked looks on the clan members watching the fight, the frown on the face of the old monsters in the shadows, and the inconspicuous smile on the clan face. Before he teleports once more. Tatsumi Pav. He walked out of the shadows leisurely, ignoring the surprised greetings and bows from the members that saw him. A quick hand sign sent his fellow hidden spectators ahead of him. Satoru's entrance still had them agitated, but he anticipated it in fact. After all, he would have been senile if he couldn't sense his own grandson's cursed energy from a paltry 500 feet up. It has been 6 months since the appearance of the eye that the clan has taken to call the Sharingan. A mutated replica of the 6 eyes. 6 months since the other clans had. Trying to know more about the boy. Walking down the paved road to his manor, he considered the eye. 3 black tomo in a sea of red. There had been mentions of another form, the form that brought black flames. That burnt a semi-grade 1 cursed spirit to nothing. Yet the boy had refused to show them once more, citing blindness from overuse of the technique. How he knew about the blindness was not certain, but they had concluded was instinctual. In the same way most people used cursed techniques. His musings ended as he got into his manor. Taking a side door, he traveled down a rarely used hidden stairway to end up in a chamber deep beneath the clan grounds. The chamber was barely lit, with shadows that seemed to move the more you looked. There were 7 seats in a circle, carved of the bedrock that surrounded them. 6. Already occupied, leaving the 7th one in the middle for him. He claimed it with a lazy stride. Seating in a leisurely posture with his face in his palm. His second palm tap. Armrest lightly, and that was the cue to start. He's progressing fast. An elder cloaked in a yellow yukata started. Faster than Satoru, and even better mannered, said another voice. The statement brought silence to the chamber. He knew it would come up. For all Satoru obvious power. He was a hard person for the elders that rigidly held on to the old traditions to like. Even more so when he start testing the rules, tugging at his leash like a dog seeking to know how far they would let him. Unfortunately for them, the length of the leash was way longer than they liked. The teen was bound to be the next clan head with those eyes of his. A calm alternative Mew. Been a heaven sent for the more traditional members of the clan. The Zenin clan sent another envoy to talk about hunting territories. He disappeared during the recess and was caught creeping towards Jiki's house by Satoru, another Vo. Stated in an attempt to move the meeting on. He let out an unnoticed sigh and wondered how long the meeting would last after the conversation restarted once more. He had a painting that had not yet been unwrapped. His bedroom waiting for him. Satoru Pav. So what do you do for fun, brat? The kid briefly glanced at him before replying and staring back at a couple taking pictures beside a billboard. Painting. The kid said with a soft voice. The contrast between both of them was ridiculous and uncanny. For all their similarities in features, their attitude and mannerism couldn't be further apart. He removed his glasses and stared at the sky in mirth with the back of his palm on his forehead. Was this how people saw him? His wide grin was straining at this point. We're in a park in the middle of Tokyo. He held a soda in his other hand while Jiki sipped from his cup of tea with his two hands in a traditional manner, while the scarred Ma stood behind him and observed their interaction with a smile. They had continued the original exploration that was planned for him over 6 months ago. This time it was free of curses. The location of the maid near death was avoided, ignored, and they ended up here. As the day got darker, the passage of cars, technology, and the clothes people wore seemed to hold the kid's interest more than he did. They had been at it for hours now, him asking questions. Questions that were answered with single words. Do you see 360? He was shocked and quiet for a moment. Not because of the question in itself. After all, it was an easy one and one that had been noted down already. This was the first in the kid had taken all day. Pale gray eyes stared into his eerie blue. There was no fear, disgust, or inferiority in those eyes while they stared into his. He reminded him almost of Geto at that moment. Even the clan head had some level of gru when he looked him in the eye. Yet there was none from Jiki. He sat back up. Are we talking about our eyes now? His renewed interest in the conversation was replied to with a shrug that had the kid staring at people again. He was to lose him. With an exaggerated sigh, he finally replied, yeah sure, when my eyes are active. Do you have a blind spot at the back of your neck? Your thoracic vertebrae to be exact. The question was not one he had gotten before, which made him actually activate his eyes to be sure. A shake of his head had the kid in an obvious thinking posture. I want to see this world, the kid stated as he looked around. The rapid change of topic had his eyebrows raised. A world at peace, a world without rampant wars, where children are taught to live before they're taught to kill, a world where getting to 50 is not a statistical anomaly. A world where the lines are drawn in the sand. Where the enemies are a known quantity explicitly different from. A world where protecting the innocent doesn't mean harming other innocents. A world where evil has a face, and it is inhuman, he stated looking into his cup of tea. Would you show me such a world, Satoru-san? This time the kid looked up. Red EY. Stare into blue. That was the moment he made a second decision that would bring pain to the higher-ups in the Jujutsu Society for years to come. He looked at the kid. There was a vulner to him that he had never shown before. A world weariness that seemed to make him even smaller and drew pronounced stress lines beneath his eyes. He needed to get away from the grubby wrinkled hands of those old men. With a bright smile more for the kid's sake than any, he replied, of course brat, now let me tell you about Jujutsu High. He was 6.5 when he got a ludicrous gift. His pale gray eyes went from the black eye wrap in his hands to the grinning face of Satoru-san. You're aware of the fact that I can't see past this, yes? His white-haired cousin's smile only got wilder. Before pointing a thumb at his own eye wrap. Common brat, try it on. We might discover a new part of your dojutsu. He gave a heavy sigh and tried his best to ignore the soft laugh Aiko let out behind him. If only he was born with the Byakugan. Then maybe, just maybe he could have given whimsical cousin what he desired. Recalling old texts he had read from even older Uchiha outposts during his days as a missing nin. The obscure texts gave vague descriptions of a progenitor of both eyes. G. The Uchiha and Hyuga shared ancestry. Common kid, try it on. With another sigh, he gently wrapped it around his eyes, before sending a minuscule amount of chakra to his ears and nose. His attempts on forming rudimentary cursed energy pulses in a bastardized version of what chakra sensors did had hit a stalemate at just a meter away from him, the Solu. The particular problem eluded him, for now. Yet even without his sight and chakra pulse, he knew his cousin's grin must have gotten bigger. The things he did for his family. Ghetto Pav. Cursed spirits were like maggots. Slippery and always at the edges of your vision. Willfully ignored by the mundane till it was impossible for them to. He walked down an alley filled with the heavy tang of excessively spilled blood. The splashes on the walls of the too slim alley painted a grotesque picture that he felt at home. The hungry gnawing of teeth tearing through supple flesh in the dark was like a buzzsaw at a mill, but like everything that had to do with curses. Mundanes were obliv. It as they walked past the alley. Their disbelief a shield. Their lack of knowledge and ability, an armor. His steps were unfortunately louder than he intended as he was stuck within his thoughts. A mistake that he would not abide a second time. The multi-limbed monstrosity snapped its neck back in a maneuver that would have killed any living thing, before letting out a screech that would have forced lesser men to run. He stared at it with boredom on his face as it jumped from the corpse it was feeding on. Hopping from wall to wall. In the tight confines of the alley he won't be able to sum his preferred curses. But against this juvenile, he doubted he'd need them. He let out a disgusted sigh at himself. What should have been an easy task was about to be dragged out. The cursed spirit must have sensed something cause it suddenly jump even higher and disappeared above the alley. Yet he knew it was not gone yet. Just waiting. He had been hunting cursed spirits since he was 10. The only thing more alluring to cursed spirits than special grace cursed objects were jujutsu sorcerers. The rabid desire to increase their cursed energy and metamorphosis into something greater than their ilk was like a hunger in them. An intense unquenchable thirst only. Matched by their hatred. Most jujutsu sorcerers had a rudimentary way of sensing cursed energy. It was mostly vague and could not accurately be trusted. Especially in places where death or blood been shed in copious amounts. It interfered with the ability to pinpoint others' cursed energy. So he waited, in the middle of the alley. Patience trained from years scouting cursed spirits. Stilling his outward motions, while his muscles were coiled beneath his baggy Jujutsu high school uniform. A shift from above, the subtle clack of claws on brick behind him, and his nerves fired. He spun on his feet with an arm outstretched and repeated a mantra he has hated realized his cursed technique. Exorcise. Absorb. The lunging cursed spirits deconstructed before him. Its fanged maw set in a featureless face screeched at him with its hands outstretched. As a bubble of blue cursed een deconstructed and forced it into a small orb before dropping on his palm. He looked at the orb in disgust. The condensed essence of a cursed being. A putrid blue that seemed to infect everything around it. He shoved it into his mouth, ignoring the familiar taste of a dirty rag used to clean up shit and vomit. It scrapped past his tongue and blissfully went down his gullet. He held the wall as he forced himself to stop the urge to vomit that viciously rose up. But this was not the first. It was hardly even the worst. Wiping the side of his mouth stood up straight. For all his hatred for his curse manipulation technique, it was what made him stand shoulder to shoulder with Satoru. The strength he wielded. A phone call drew his attention away from the desecrated body a few meters behind him. He tucked his hand into his pocket before flipping the phone to his ear. Geto here. Ah, Geto-san, you've been assigned to a scouting job. 2 sorcerers have been missing for the past 2 days, Utahime-san and Mei-san. He raised an eyebrow at that. Utahime was a 2nd grade. And not a particularly strong one in his books. But Mei was no slouch. A 1st grade sorcerer with the ability and experience to back it up. The man on the phone continued. Your team is being dispatched. Meet us at Hamamatsu District. The old manor in the forest. Leary-san would be with me. But I've called Satoru-san and he has promised to. There. Grunting an affirmation at the overly formal handler, he shut the phone and started heading to the bus station, hands in his pocket and back in a lazy slouch. Hamamoto shish. Be a stop away. Maybe this time he would get there before Satoru. The thought brought a soft smile to his face. 30 minutes later and he was walking up a broken cobblestone path that led deep into the forest. His cursed spirits had scouted ahead and informed him that there were 2 people present, as well as a massive manor that radiated so much cursed energy he felt it from this far off. Bypassing the broken gate and getting to the front of the mansion, he was greeted by the presence of the glasses-wearing, corporate-dressed handler who gave a short bow. A lazy glance and wave from Shoko, who stayed stuck on her phone typing. Giving his own lazy wave back, he asked after a brief glance around for Satoru. He's not here yet, is he? He directed the question at Shoko, yet the handler replied. Ah, Gojo-san informed me he would be a little late as he was already preoccupied before I called. The reply drew a crease on his brow. A familiar soft sound of displaced air draws his attention and ends what he is about to say. Shoko and the handler remained oblivious. What happened? But he knew. He was familiar enough with Satoru's means of transportation to know he had arrived. What confused him were the amount of steps that came up the stairs. The confusion deepened when he saw Satoru climb up the stairs, and for a moment he considered if he made a mistake swallowing that particular cursed spirit, before realized the second person was way shorter than Satoru. The white-haired kid had his hair tied up in a bun similar to his, with a few strands falling to the side of his face, while a black wrap covered his eyes. He wore a black long-sleeved sweatshirt, with a watching-colored short as well as a pair of brown ghetto sandals. Satoru had a wide grin on his face as they all stared at the duo in surprise and confusion. What the fuck? Was Shoko's eloquent reply. Her tired eyes finally left her phone to stare at the white-haired duo. When did the bastard multiply? Satoru's only reply was to grin even wider, with a hand on the kid's head. This is the new and improved Satoru 2.0. You all should say your hellos. The kid let out a sigh before shaking Gojo's hand off and smoothly transitioning into a formal bow. My name is Gojo Jiki, nice to meet you. At the mention of his name, he could see the tumblers click in Shoko and the handler's head. He had heard of the kid too, of course. For the title of once in a lifetime Genyu. Gojos seemed to breed them like rabbits. His rumored mutated 6 eyes were supposed to be the icing on the cake. Shoko pocketed her phone and walked up to the kid, introducing herself with a smile. I'm Shoko Leary, nice to meet you, she offered with a handshake, which the kid took. Soft smile of his own. Not to break up the moment, but we've 2 sorcerers missing and presumably dead in that scary manor over there. He ignored Shoko's glare and the whispered trash that accompanied it and focused on the kid, who turned his head to face him. He had heard the kid's eyes were different. The 6 eyes. So how the hell did he manage to maneuver so easily with his eyes blindfolded? Mao Mao. Leave it to you to spoil all my fun. Satoru walked forward and stretched. Let me give you a peek behind a real technique, Jiki. He turned his head behind him as spoke. Before focusing on the building once more. The glow of his eyes gave him an idea of what he was about to do. It wasn't exactly a technique. More of a subtle application of Satoru's limitless. With a hand sign, he for blue sphere above the building. A second later he could feel the building shudder and tremor as old rain-beaten planks, windows, and bricks were broken apart and sucked. A sudden gravitational force. The demolition of the building was fast. With the destruction of its barrier, the cursed spirit would be forced to face them in direct combat. He took a step back and prepare. The creation of a portal. The broken building stayed midair for a second before dropping along with a screaming occupant. Utahime. He considered the drop and the angle of her fall and deemed it an acceptable outcome. Moving to arrest her fall would leave him unable to act when the curse finally its move. Shoko and the handler would not be fast enough to catch her. He didn't factor in the little white-haired missile that blurred past him fast enough to almost trigger his reflexive summoning of a special grade curse. Jiki Pav. He had not expected to do much today. It was one of his rare rest days when he finger painted with Aiko as his muse and assistant. But they had gone from preparing histo-licking ice cream on the streets of Tokyo, where he had spent the past couple of hours reacquainting himself on how to maneuver without sight, to teleporting to a haunted house. When the call came in, he had requested to join. It felt like the perfect time to see actual jujutsu sorcery at work. Satoru was all too happy to comply, gladly talking about his teammates. Shoko and Geto. Shoko distinctly reminded him of a teammate he had during his Anbu days. But technique, while important, was not something that interested him much. Geto's curse manipulation, on the other hand, their introduction was quick and to the point, especially when the person he guessed was Geto from his voice highlighted the fact that they were here to save people. Then was Satoru's subsequent destruction of the house and the scream that drew his attention. He moved instinctively. Cursed energy-enhanced muscles sent him blitzing past Geto and the still shocked Shoko. The speed at which he moved loosed his eye wrap and activated his Sharingan with barely any thought. A leap left the cobblestone cracked and sent him soaring into the air. Flipping mid-air, he landed in a crouch on a falling part of the wall that held pictures of an old couple each other. With his Sharingan doing the heavy work of calculating the angles of the falling building, he jumped off his perch. Twisting mid-air in a feat to match any trained acrobat, he avoided debris mid-fall, and skipped off bricks barely bigger than a palm before catching the much larger woman in a bridal carry. The fall was easier and he angled for the area where he calculated the least amount of debris to fall. His reinforced feet slammed hard into the ground as he tucked his nebraced as stone. Wooden frames and a huge slab of the wall fell around him, his position on the ground the sole exception. He had barely taken in the surprise and growing red blush on the woman's face with his single revealed eye before he felt the ground shake beneath him. A mud-colored hand broke out of the ground, pulling up its full body from beneath the earth. The accompanying roar from the curse's lip less ma sent his hair blasting. B could feel his eye reacting to the new threat. The three tomo shifting and reforming into his mangekyo. A reflexive Amaterasu was halfway formed before an even greater monstrosity ripped the earth apart from beneath the monster. A white and green maggot-like curse that, in half, a hand on his shoulder stopped him from burning the two monsters to nothing. I'm not sure Geto would like you burning his pet all that much. Accepting Satoru's warning for what it was, he turned his head to look at Geto. So this was curse manipulation. The earring-wearing teen looked at him with a raised brow. His body instinctively set in a stance. He had noticed the spinning of his mangekyo had that effect on people. Didn't think I'd be seeing you again so soon, kid. The familiar voice sent his eyes to a particular rubble where a familiar beautiful blue-haired woman sat with a soft smile face, as well as an umbrella that covered her head. Mei-san. Noteso, I'm back. The eye wrap in this chapter was partly inspired by a fanfic I read years back. In that fanfic, Itachi didn't have the plot-required sickness and offered Sasuke his eyes. Yet felt even more badass, kicking ass and taking names, acting like the Sharingan was more of a handicap. It has been years and I can't remember the particular name, but that's what made me an Itachi fan. Him and Kisame. I think you guys have an idea of where we are TLYs. I'll try to aim for a chapter a week release. Multiple a week if possible, no promises though. But I'm trying to get back the swing of things. The technique Gojo used here is described as an imaginary apple that things are drawn to. Pretty much impossible to explain that from another POV. So I visualized it by manifesting the imaginary apple as the black ball Tendo Pain uses to form Shibaku Tensai. Random guy. Nah, I don't plan on nerfing the 6 eyes. Gojo bro. I don't agree with him breaking character. And yes, he deceives half the word, but something I tried to show in these beginning chapters is that Itachi is tired. Someone who killed his first man when he was less than 6. Lived a lie for the rest of his life, a hero who died to the world as a villain. This was the first time he really let walls down a little, and it wasn't to a random person but someone he believed would have an idea of what he had been through. Someone who has been seen as a genius. He was 6. I do agree the writing might not have been all that. I just rushed it and wanted to get it over with. Thanks for the review still. Disagreement aside, following the aftermath of the past day and the standing invitation from Meimei to come visit, Jiki followed his cousin and his classmates back to Jujutsu High, which led to where he was now. With his awareness and Sharingan, he finally had greater control over the immense cursed energy that seemed to rage just beneath his SK. Opening doors he had feared locked since his arrival. For all his prodigious talent in the shinobi arts, where he truly flourished was in the use of genjutsu. Imposing your reality of the world upon others, with both brute force and guile. His Mangekyou established that with the formation of his Tsukuyomi. Yet where genjutsu took as much effort as breathing for him in his past life, in this new world he had to fight tooth and nail for every inch of progress. His problem boiled to one thing: cursed energy. Heated voices drew his eyes down to the court. He observed the white and black-haired duo as they argued their varying points about the weak, the strong, and their place. Society on the basketball court from the stands while Shoko braided his hair from behind him. He understood Geto's point about looking out for the weak. After all, he had slaughtered his clan to protect the hidden leaf. Ninshu was created to protect and understand. Other before it was corrupted into ninjutsu. Yet he also understood where Satoru was coming from. Why should the strong be forced with the responsibility of protecting weak? Why give yourself an obvious shackle and handicap? With a shrug, he ignored the brewing argument and went back to his contemplations and experiment. Genjutsu was applied by sending chakra through one of the five senses and then hijacking the nervous system with the aid of the chakra pathways that sent chakra through body. The Uchiha focused on visual genjutsu as a result of their blessed eyes. Yet unlike his clansmen, Itachi had a broader view of genjutsu. He was proficient in the usage of senses to entrap a target. Yet even he could not claim to be unbiased. The Sharingan made a difficult task borderline simple. Sending chakra through the opponent's eyes with the aid of the Sharingan was as easy as breathing and as subtle as a fish moving through water. In the elemental nations, shinobi knew that crossing eyes with an Uchiha was enough reason to try and flush out their chakra systems. The really good ones did it in a seiko. But for most, they never even had the chance to make an attempt. In this new world, genjutsu was not a known art, yet it was even harder to apply it. This was simply due to the nature of cursed energy itself. Where chakra flowed in stable pathways that made ninjutsu and genjutsu easy to apply and manipulate, cursed energy was volatile and arbitrary. As an energy source that came from negative emotions, it was capricious in its flow. The instability of cursed energy acted as a constant flush, therefore any cursed energy into another was disrupted by the opponent's cursed energy in a second. Sending chakra through the opponent's eyes with the aid of the Sharingan was as easy as breathing and as subtle as a fish moving through water. In the elemental nations, shinobi knew that crossing eyes with an Uchiha was enough reason to try and flush out their chakra systems. The really good ones did it in a seiko. But for most, they never even had the chance to make an attempt. His contemplation was broken by the gym door sliding open, introducing the broad features of the principle of Jujutsu High. His frown berated the teenagers and forced cringe before he even said a word. How long are you going to keep fooling around, you brats, and where is Shoko? Hiya, was Shoko's unenthusiastic response along with a wave. The broad-shouldered man sent brown eyes up to the stands, which widened in surprise as they met his black and red. Jiki-kun, I was not aware you were present. He sent an accusing finger at Satoru, which led the man's attention back to his wayward student. You're aware that this a high school, are you not, Satoru? Satoru turned his head to the side and scratched it with an abashed expression on his face. With a heavy sigh, the principal continued, be that as it may, the higher-ups have assigned the two of you on a mission. A direct request from Tengen-sama. With a side gat Shoko, he added in a softer voice, yet I don't think anything stops Shoko from joining you. I'm sure they can handle it, she said with a wave while standing up. Someone has to be responsible for the kid while Satoru is away. With a heavy shrug, he turned around and continued, come with me then, Satoru, Geto. We've more to talk about. With a quick wave, Satoru and Geto quickly put on the eye shirt jackets and followed him out. Come on then, Jiki. Let me introduce you to Nanami-san. he stood up in one smooth movement and followed behind her. He had an idea of how to go about working with genjutsu. All that remained was actually applying it. As for Satoru and Geto, they were strong, so he had no reason to worry about whatever clandestine mission the higher-ups had planned for them. According to your instructors, you've been progressing fast. The old man sat with legs folded in a meditation pose in his dim cavern and faced him with his eyes closed. He gave a single nod of affirmation before the old man continued. And yet we still don't know what your innate technique is. Opening his eyes to stare at Jiki with a placid and uncaring look, he continued. For all your immense talent, Blee's eyes, and potential, you're not compete till you've acquired your innate technique. He sat quietly and thought about his recent problem. His innate technique. He should have unlocked it by now, and yet he was still seen to be lacking. Few would say it to Hisan, none other than the elders would acknowledge it. Yet, it gave reason for dissent among clan members who didn't like the apparent favoritism shown to him. He was not oblivious to the clan politics being played. He was aware of the two sides of the conflict, yet he was loath to play that game with them. He had played it once. What did it bring him other than loss, misery, and regret? I'm aware, he let out in his soft voice. I feel I'm somewhat close to it, clan head. It should not be an issue for long. I won't disappoint you. I know you won't, child. He agreed before standing up and walking to the edge of the room where a pot of tea and its accompanying cups lay, with the obligatory scolding. He walked back to him with a tray of tea and biscuits. Tell me, how goes your painting of the sunset from the top of Mount Takao? The old man said with a soft smile. Letting out his own smile for the first time that day, he shifted from his more formal Caesar position to a cross-leg position and started talking about one of the few things really drew his interest in this new world. While he took a cup of tea from the old man, I found the perfect color of blue for. The moment Shoko called him that Satoru and Geto were set to return and requested his aid in throwing a surprise welcome back party, he contacted Aiko and requested to Jujutsu High. He didn't have anything to do for the day. He was homeschooled in preparation for his Jujutsu High acceptance, and with his intellect, learning the advanced science had no difficult, although he had no interest in furthering it. He had proved to his instructors he would have no reason to continue under their tutelage, thereby freeing up his SCH greatly. He had even heard whispers of him enrolling into Jujutsu High early, yet that was all they were, rumors. Their drive ended at the bottom of the long stairs that led to Jujutsu High. Aiko stepped out from the passenger seat and opened his door. He stepped out and with a parting nod at the driver he turned around and started climbing. Hand in H. With Aiko to her secret delight. By the time they had gotten to the top of the stairs, there were drops of sweat on his face. He cursed his infantile legs as they finally passed through the red gates of Jujutsu High. He felt the slimy feel of a barrier as he stepped past the gate. It was a feeling he was not sure he was ever going to get used to. His eyes saw the threads of cursed energy that reinforced the barrier and led further into the earth, Tengen-sama's work. He had not officially met the oldest Jujutsu sorcerer yet, and he was not in a hurry to meet him. The man had lived for over 500 years, what was a couple more to? Yet he had heard enough. Enough to know that he was the pillar that upheld the secrecy of Jujutsu and curses. Shoko met them at the gate, rounding up her texting before flipping the phone and walking towards them. Beside her were the opposing frowning and smiling visages of Nanami and Haibara. They're almost here, Shoko started as she walked closer to them. With a quick ruffle of his hair, she led them deeper into the school and to the gym. He was on the ladder hanging balloons over the gym door when the sound and an accompanying flare of cursed energy hit. A loud boom that sent shockwaves as far back. Gym. An attack, inside the school. Were his first thought. Impossible. He dropped to the floor as he felt even more cursed energy fluctuate, a cursed energy he was familiar with. He didn't even need to exercise his rudimentary sensor abilities. The owner. Satoru. To his surprise, Nanami was already halfway through the door by the time he landed. He had underestimated the blonde-haired teen. He had not let the shock of the inside phase him while Haibara and Shoko were still frozen in surprise. Pushing them out of his mind, he was only a step behind Nanami. With cursed energy reinforcement, he blurred past him. His smaller physique lent him more maneuverability. His immense pool of cursed energy, and his precise manipulation granted him a boost in speed that left Nanami as an indistinct visage behind him. Satoru was hurt. He could feel it in the way his cursed energy recoiled and fluctuated, and yet he was still fighting. Fighting something that his senses could not pick up. He was barely a minute away from Satoru when he felt his cursed energy disappear. Impossible. Satoru was the strongest. With a reinforced leap, he vaulted over the maw that covered his sight from the last location where he felt Satoru's cursed energy. Dissolution. That was all his eyes could see. The area was a mess of debris, blood and a body. Where lines of houses once stood, now there was nothing but rubble, with an elevated platform that held up a body. A body surrounded by fly heads. Common cursed spur. Were no danger of their own. So why was a body beneath them? A body that his eyes told him was still. Perforated heart buried in a torso bearing a large gash that had torn past the pectoral muscles, ripping aside layers of muscle, fat, bone to split a torso in two. A body that had a gaping stab wound in the weak side at the top of the skull. A body that his rudimentary sensor abilities told him was leaking cursed energy while some amount of cursed energy lingered. A dead body, he had to admit after trying to deny the inevitable for so long. A dead body that looked so much like him. A hoarse voice called out a name as he stared at th body. Satoru. A hitched breath and an aborted movement to grasp at his cousin was all he remembered as he stared at the body for longer than he knew was wise. Especially when the killer was still out there. His eyes imprinted the image of white hair soaked in blood into his brain. The shock had swiftly turned to horror, and horror to rage, rage to wrath, and wrath to cold apathy. He would have time to grieve. That time was not now. Detaching and suppressing his emotions behind the doors he learned to form during his time in Anbu. He analyzed the bleeding form on the ground. A loud boom that shook the earth drew his attention from Satoru for what felt like the first time in days. The continuous explosions and vibrations forced him to tear his EY from the body and turn towards the inner parts of the school. With a stomp of his feet, he moved, leaving the body behind for Nanami and whoever came after to deal with. Geto's cursed energy acted as a beacon to his location. A lock. He knew his cousin's killer was present in. He's too late to stop the first swing of the sword. He could only watch. His eyes burning the image into his brain as steel cleaves through Geto's chest at insane speed. The of blood covers the man's view for a split second, yet he swings the blade a second time. Knowing the perfect angle to cut. He's not too late this time. He bursts into the falling corridor and stomps on the falling blade with his left leg, forcing it into the wooden floor. With a twist of his hips, he spins and slams his right shin. The surprised man's face, hard enough to send him rocketing back out of the falling corridor and into the ruin that used to be the tombs of the sky corridor. With one swift movement, he picks up Geto and leaps out, landing a few meters away from the collapsing structure. What is this? The little monster is present too. Waving off dust, the muscular man walks out of a hole in the building he was buried in, cracking his neck as he eyes He eyes his cousin's killer too. Over 6 feet tall with a physique that screamed unbridled strength. No cursed energy emission or residual. Feet are spread out in a casual. That seems languid. He remembers the speed that almost bisected Geto into two. The resilience that allowed him to survive a reinforced kick to the head and a trip through multiple buildings. A scratch and comes to a conclusion. Close combat against him would be suboptimal. A glance back at Geto's bleeding form reinforces that fact. Yet he didn't have a choice. A quiet one. Or does that have something to do with the dead body of your cousin you passed? Blazing red eyes met placid black set in a face with a sharp smile that was all teeth. He sent his cursed energy through them. Few genjutsu were as good as the one in his eye. And he had enough hate to fuel this with sheer brute force. Tsukuyomi. He felt his eye split and morph into its Mangekyou form. Visceral illusions at the tip of his tongue. The cursed energy slipped into the man, and when it found nothing to hang, it leaked back out of the man faster than it slipped in. No cursed energy instead of absolute control. How? With a step forward, the man continued, unaware of how easily this fight could have ended. I'm not here for you, brat. Move aside. You killed him, didn't you? He didn't realize he had spoken till the man gave him a surprised look. It had not sounded like his voice. That tone, devoid of all inflection. Had he been heavy with such anger that he was forced to shut down his emotional responses? Shuzia's death. Revenge then. The surprise transitioned into amusement. Valid as any reason, I guess. With a shrug, the man moved. He had underestimated the scared man's speed. Yet, man had also underestimated his eyes. The Sharingan predicted an opponent's movement by reading the flow of chakra and the subtle twitches in muscles and body language. The man's lack of cursed energy harder to predict his movements, but not impossible. He saw the lariat coming, and even with his vaunted speed and reinforcement, it took all he had to dive beneath the outstretched forearm. Rolling to his feet, he spun and unleashed a left hook into his opponent's back, but the man had stopped his own momentum with a disgustingly powerful feat of strength and resilience. Slamming his feet hard enough into the ground to crater it, he twisted his hips and lashed out with a kick of his own. The two attacks hit simultaneously. Where his blow sent the scared man staggering a step back, the kick sent him flying back in an ironic reversal of what happened barely a minute ago. Flipping mid-air, he landed and lashed out with an instinctive kick that forced the man to block in surprise. He had gotten too close too fast. Against his cousin's killer. There was no time to think. No time to plan. Against his inhuman speed, the only tools at his disposal were his eyes and instincts, and that was lasted this long while dodging blows that sent shockwaves through the air and deflecting kicks that shattered what remained of the tombs of the sky corridor. The fight was a whirlwind. His opponent's movements too unpredictable for him to use Amaterasu. His attack pattern relentless. His stamina, even after going through two previous battles, seemed untouched, and even with his eyes against this opponent, all he could do was react. Another blow snuck past his guard before burying itself into his rib. The pain of two of them breaking from the impact fueled his resolve to slam his fist into the overextend arm in a desperate bid at breaking the forearm. His exertions forced only a wince from his foe. He had started flagging. For all his immense cursed energy, his body was just too young. Unlike chakra, cursed energy was too volatile. It was not as suitable for a still developing child to stress. He looked into his opponent's eyes and the bright grin on his murderous face as he ducked under a fist and lashed out with a kick to his diaphragm that sent him into the unrealized something. The man enjoyed the fight. The thrill. The pressure of a life lived on the knife edge. The bloodlust. The opportunity to indulge in combat for the sake of. For a second he saw a familiar blue-skinned man in his place. It resolved back into the black hair and black eyes of his opponent with a blink of his eye. The kick had propelled him into the immense tree that lay at the center of the two. The sky corridor. And the man had dug his hand into the tree to keep himself aloof. This was the first respite he got since he stopped Geto from going the same way as Satoru, and that was all he needed to slow down his perception enough to think. For the first time, the man was stationary. Unmoving. Amaterasu could end this immediately. He considered it for all of 0.2 seconds before discarding it. The man had lever and a platform. With his reflex and speed, he could dodge the black fire before it finished emerging. What he needed to do was draw him close. With a glance at the man's serene breathing pattern, he had to admit what he had suspected earlier. The man was holding back. He had seen his cousin's body. 2 differblade wounds. One on his head and the one that almost split him in half. One of them must have been what pierced Limitless, especially with his lack of innate cursed energy. The how was ambiguous, but the capacity for it existed. And yet when looked at the man, he didn't see a single weapon, other than the purple segmented cursed spirit with a baby's face that lay coiled around his torso. Enhanced perception and a precognitive sight, those are what your eyes offer, are they not? He looked down upon him as he spoke, yet you're hamstrung by a body too wide and too weak to keep up. If you were maybe 10 years older, maybe this would have been a challenge. Releasing his grip on the tree, he landed on one of the thick knots of ropes that bound the tree and stared down at him with a tilt of his head and a knowing smile that arrogance. For all his bloodlust, the man was more analytical than he expected. He had to buy time, both for reinforcements and for his own risky plan. All he needed was to catch his breath and start twisting his cursed energy into what he wanted. Immense strength, resilience, speed, and reflexes at the cost of your cursed energy. How is that? With a raised brow, that man considered his question. You're really a child, aren't you? To be unaware of a heavenly restriction. With the way you fought, I could have mistaken for someone else. A groan and movement a few meters behind him drew both their attention to the limp form of Geto forcing himself to his feet. He watched as the amusement and interest from the man into a soft frown that sent a chill down his spine. I don't suppose you'll just close your eyes and let me go, would you? His flat-eyed stare was all the reply the man needed. With another crack of his neck, he continued. Would rather not kill a kid barely older than mine, but you're not giving much a choice. An arm or a leg then. With what you've shown so far, I'm sure you'll make do. With a soft smile and his arms spread out, he continued, my name is Toji Fushiguro. Don't forget the name of the man you're supposed to have your revenge on, you little monster. A whisper came from behind him. A whisper that saved him from losing an arm. The cursed spirit. That was the only reason he looked to his right the moment Toji disappeared from his sight. The sheer speed the man had displayed earlier was ridiculous. But this was inconceivable. Without being able to read his cursed energy even before he moved, for the first time in both lives, his perception failed him. Appearing midair in front of him while drawing a one-edged broadsword with a fur hilt from the purple curse's mouth, Toji let out a bastardized Lado swing that aimed for H. shoulder. The broadsword was slowed down by a red spectral clavicle and scapula that formed above him. The swing only stopped after parting through 3 red ribs before halting meters from his actual shoulder. The dispersed force of the strike turned the area beneath them into a crater, sending him to his knees and blowing the struggling form of G and the collapsed buildings away. He could not say who was more surprised as he stared into shocked black eyes and could see his own expression reflected in them. He could feel the dip in his cursed energy, even as naked muscles formed around the skeleton torso that protected him instinctively. With the drain from his Susanoo, he only had enough in reserve for one last strike. The gambit had paid off. Toji was stuck midair with no leverage for his immense speed. With a whisper, he unshackled his hold on the black flames, Amaterasu. He only had a spare second to watch the flames spring up on Toji before his vision blurred with excruciating pain that went from his eyes to his brain before he was sent crashing into the ground head first. Yet his hearing was clear enough to hear Toji's howl of pain. He was sucked into the empty embrace of unconsciousness.